The last three speakers have laid out a portrait of the challenge of antimicrobial use in the agricultural sector, amidst, of course, the receding frontier of effective antimicrobials and antibiotics. And, of course, the exemplar of both the Netherlands and the Republic of Korea clearly shows, of course, two very different countries that have, of course, grappled with this issue, and effectively so in taking these steps forward, as well as the application of the precautionary principle and the One Health approach, and the intersectoral collaboration required for accomplishing these ends. From the vantage point of human and animal health, our five presenters have commendably suggested where we might build upon the UK review on AMR's recommendations, where we might go further, and where we might even take different steps. Tackling the multisectoral challenge of antimicrobial resistance, we now turn to two champions of these global efforts and ask them to chart what we would need to see next, actually, particularly here in the UN process leading to the high-level meeting in September. First, we will hear from Dame Sally Davies, who serves as Chief Medical Officer for England and the Chief Medical Advisor to the UK government on medical matters. Her tireless advocacy on antibiotic resistance is well known to us, from her role in the WHO Executive Board to, of course, to having authored the book, The Drugs Don't Work. May I invite Dame Sally Davies to offer her reflections.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stone. You've given a great commentary as we've gone, so let's just think about what's happening. We have people dying because they don't get the drugs. We have people dying because of an excessive use of drugs. And we risk losing the battles we have won on TB, on malaria, on HIV, as resistance goes up, let alone about the bacteria as well. And where are we going? Jim, Lord ONeill, has shown us how it will be bad if we do not do something. So what can we do? Well, we can do as the global community has been doing. We can make resolutions, feel we've done something, and go back to our countries, and business goes on as ever. It gets worse and more people die. Or we can grasp this opportunity of a global action plan agreed by the WHO, agreed by the FAO, agreed by OIE, and make it happen. And that's why we really need the UN high-level meeting. We need it because, as we've heard and we all know, this is cross-sectoral. It needs lifting up. There are other people involved, not just the member states and those organizations. We heard mention of the environment. We heard from UNICEF, Médecins Sans Frontières. There are all these other players, let alone the private sector, who somehow have to work with academia in the innovation field for both the diagnostics we need and the new drugs we need. So I'd say it's about time for some leadership. It's leadership from you diplomats in the front row. It's leadership from nation states, and it's leadership from everyone. And this UN meeting can be as powerful as we, the players, want. Or it can be what in English we call a damp squib and do nothing. Can we move to stopping growth promotion use of antibiotics in animals? Of course we can. But will we? It's a challenge we've got to face. Can we get rid of excess use? Yes. Can we help the logistics in poor countries to improve access? Of course we can. We've got to just get on and start to solve this complex issue bit by bit, stopping internet sales, stopping antibiotics being put into routine animal feed. And all of this, as Precious put so well, is going to need coordination, transparency, and real thinking so that nobody is left behind. The MDGs have delivered, but let's let AMR be the reason the SDGs aren't delivered. So I hope we don't squander this moment, but it's for all of us to do it. And if you are not expert at this and you want the background, then there is a pile of the books over at the back and you can pick some up. Thank you.
Thank you, Dame Sally Davies. Your passion is clearly infectious, and I would suggest to our audience, actually, the resistance is futile. Now we will hear from the WHO Assistant Director General, Dr. Keiji Fukuda, who also serves as Special Representative on antimicrobial resistance. In shaping the global approach to AMR, he has played conductor over what must sometimes seem to be a cacophony of global interests in this space, but he does so with masterful even-handedness, equanimity, and insight. Dr. Fukuda, may I invite you to offer your thoughts?
Thank you, Anthony. You know, I started my training in medicine at the start of the AIDS epidemic, and in this week in which HIV will be discussed, it's really impossible for me not to draw some parallels in my own mind. When I think back to that time, one of the characteristics, or one of the things I remember most, is that we knew that something was going on, but we really didn't have any inkling about the scope, about what was to come. And I think in many ways, we are further ahead with AMR, but we are a little bit in the same situation. But the thing I remember most is that when I think backwards, the biggest lesson is that so much time was wasted. Just a huge amount of time was wasted, and I think this is what drives many of us now. Now, the reason why the UK review has been so incredibly useful in a lot of ways is that I think that Lord ONeill and his team got the narrative right, they got the scope right, and they've gone into what are the practical options that we have to deal with. Because the global challenge right now is that how do we retain the eyes on the scope of what has to be done, and at the same time, how do we prioritize? We can't move on everything exactly at the same time, and how are we going to do this effectively? And I think this is why the two meetings which he highlighted coming up are so important, which also Sally highlighted. Both the high-level meeting at the UN General Assembly, which is aimed at the heads of state, and also the G20 meeting, which is really one of the major economic engines for the world. And I think the question is whether leadership will be exerted. And so the question is, what does leadership mean in this kind of situation? And I'll just offer two things that I'm personally looking forward to. One of them is that I think leadership is needed to enable preemptive action to take place. You know, as the ONeill report points out, we're either going to act now and pay a little, or we're going to react in the future and simply suffer the consequences. I mean, that choice is very stark, and it is in front of us. The second thing is that what is the most effective way, and I'm quoting from your report, to allocate resources and risk? This is the issue which binds and connects together the issue of access, the issue of how do we finance such an endeavor, and also how do we handle some of the challenges coming up with the idea of sustainable research and development, at the same time balancing the access to the products which are developed. And so with that, these are the things that I look forward to being really jumped forward from these two major meetings coming up. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Both of our discussants are emphatic, of course, in the need for collective action, leadership from all quarters and sectors, and of course, they admonish us not to squander this opportunity. The choice, as Keiji puts it, is to pay now or pay more later. Now I want to open now actually the floor, and we will alternate between some brief 2-minute interventions and other questions from the audience. So anyone wishing to pose a question may queue up actually in the standing microphone in the middle of the room. I will begin with actually inviting Ms. Carla Maccabi, Director of the FAO Liaison Office in New York City. Wonderful.
Thank you very much. I really want to start by thanking every woman, every child for associating FAO with this event, and also welcome and recognize the report presented here by Lord ONeill that we really appreciate. I know that we don't have much time, but what I would like to say is that, of course, we heard from all the panelists that progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals is really threatened by the emerging threat of antimicrobial resistance. So this is really a big challenge. Speaking from the FAO perspective, I would say that intensifying food production and food systems means additional challenges in disease management and even higher potential for increased antimicrobial resistance. So the burden of AMR is mostly affecting those rural poor. This was also mentioned by the panelists, who live in close contact with the animals under poor hygienic conditions. This is something that I wanted to highlight, and also highlight that most of the smallholder farmers are women living in very fragile environments and exposed directly to the most common infectious diseases. And even if medication is available, it may not respond. So I would say that given this complexity, of course, FAO is fully committed to the One Health approach, together with WHO and ONeill as a tripartite. FAO with member states and the commercial sector have to ensure health, animal welfare, and the people's livelihood. I would also say that, of course, we have an important role to play in identifying and, of course, defining strategies to reduce AMR threat as the sole international organization, and this was also mentioned here, combining agricultural aspects, food safety, and environmental issue in aquatic and terrestrial settings. And of course, most of the work that we do was also highlighted here, Codex Alimentarium. We are really expecting that we will come with very important results. So I really trust that today's discussion will really contribute to the successful outcome of the high-level meeting in September. Thank you.
Thank you so much for adding FAO's important voice to this. And if I could take a question from, of course, the standing microphone there. I'll be alternating until we're about 6 deep, at which point I'll ask the panel if they could have some responses directed to some of the first 6 interventions.
Thank you. Laurie Garrett from the Council on Foreign Relations. 2 very quick questions. First, directly to Jaap. Do you have economic data that can help us argue that decreasing the use of growth promoters does not deleteriously affect the economic outcome for the farmer, and that there's savings? Can you demonstrate that yet? And then just generally, we've only heard the Callistin plasmid mentioned, but of course we have NDM 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and we have the Visa plasmid, the MRSA plasmid, and a whole host of other plasmids. 30 years ago, WHO had a plasmid monitoring service and a database for monitoring plasmids around the world for drug resistance, but in those days it was really expensive, time-consuming, and difficult to demonstrate the existence of a plasmid in a given sample. Now, with metagenomics, you can do it for pennies, and high school students can do it. Why is there not consideration of linking demonstration of the existence in key environmental samples of key plasmids to direct action? Why don't we go that step? For example, to do metagenomic surveillance of soil, agricultural soil, human sewage runoff, random market sampling of livestock, coastal water sampling. And if you find the presence of plasmids in those samples, you get mandatory upstream action. Shut down, stop use, and cease use until you demonstrate no more presence of plasmid in samples.
Thank you, Ms. Garrett. And I'm going to keep moving so that we actually have opportunity to hear as many of these interventions as possible. I will next actually invite Mr. Lucas Wiarda, Global Marketing Director and Head of Sustainable Antibiotics Program for DSM Sinochem Pharmaceuticals.
Yes, thank you. My name is Lucas Wiarda. I'm representing DSM Sinochem Pharmaceuticals, one of the leading manufacturers of sustainable antibiotics. I'm thankful for the organization of today. I'm thankful for the AMR review with the courageous outcomes they have reported in their report. And I'm thankful for the antibiotics themselves, which saved my life twice. And especially the last sepsis I had 5 years back was very intense, and I'm grateful that I'm here because of the antibiotics. Second, I am grateful that you offer me the opportunity to address a topic which is persistently and continuously not discussed enough in the public debate of AMR, and that is the pharmaceutical pollution. We know that a number of manufacturers, primarily in China and India, let's say around 200, including our own plant, that we generate around 30,000 to 70,000 tons of active antimicrobial waste annually, which needs to be treated. If not treated, the untreated effluent waste is disposed unnecessarily into the environment, making local communities sick and suffer, including women, children, newborns, and many others, whereas it could be solved. Now, DSM Sinochem Pharmaceuticals is calling on the industry to stop manufacturing, buying, selling, and making irresponsibly made antibiotics. And we wish to anchor simple basic requirements like operating dedicated wastewater treatment plants at every single site that is making antibiotics, like, of course, testing your effluent on antibiotic activity, to anchor that in legislation. And we need indeed leadership from the policy makers and regulators to do this. And at the same time, we call the industry to take responsibility and make sure that antibiotics are made sustainably clean. And for this, I am doing my very best to mobilize the industry and establish a quality mark or an industry label. All fantastic proposals you have made, Mr. Lord ONeill. And I will do my very best to mobilize my peers and competitors and marketers, customers, whoever,
Thank
to
you,
come
Mr.
up with this label. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your leadership, and we welcome, of course, your efforts on controlling environmental effluents from these point sources of pollution, which are clearly very important. And if I could take one from the standing microphone.
Thank you very much. I'm Stefan Peterson. I'm Chief of Health in UNICEF. AMR is truly a global phenomenon, but I'd like to reflect on the situation in low-income countries where a lot of UNICEF field activities occur, where lack of access to antibiotics actually kills more children than resistance at this stage. Certainly it coexists with excess irrational use, but my message is that as we tackle excess use, we must preserve access. And the excess use of antibiotics in farm animals in this part of the world should not be paid by, the price should not be paid by poor children in poor countries by denying them access. This requires strong health systems and building strong health systems also in low-income countries. There's a Lancet piece from last year that shows that the antimicrobial resistant rate correlates very well with the out-of-pocket health expenditure, the proportion of total health expenditure that is out of pocket. Now, for us as UNICEF, we're already doing a lot of work to tackle antimicrobial resistance. It's called good breastfeeding, it's called good nutrition, it's called hand washing, it's called water and sanitation in health facilities to prevent infection. And on the rational drug use side, it's called integrated care, IMCI, Integrated Management of Childhood Illness, ICCM, etc. So it's more of the same in stronger health systems. Now, we need to build those health systems. We need health insurance solutions. We also need to stop addressing diseases and start treating patients and children. For instance, tackling malaria vertically and saying, congratulations, your child does not have malaria. We now have good evidence that that actually leads to very high irrational prescription of antibiotics because you want to satisfy the parent and yourself as a health worker. So in addition to strengthening health systems, carrying on the work we're doing, I'd like to call for surveillance, not just of antimicrobial resistance, but also of drug use, of access and use patterns to see whether the interventions we put in place make a difference. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And if Ms. Stephanie Amadeo, the Minister Counselor for the Permanent Mission of the United States to the United Nations is present, we invite your intervention.
First, I just wanted to thank the hosts and the presenters for the meeting, this briefing and meeting this afternoon, in particular Lord ONeill and every woman and every child. I think the meeting today shows, with the diversity of speakers, hosts, and participants, is a real testament to the importance and seriousness of this issue and the breadth and depth of commitments to countering the AMR. We very much believe that the United States government very much believes that antimicrobial resistance threatens the health and economic potential of all nations and all people. Every individual, community, and nation holds both responsibility and opportunity for solutions. The WHO Global Action Plan is most definitely a roadmap for a global approach to AMR, and it enables a whole of society and whole of government action. With regard to AMR and the SDGs, one of the topics of the discussion this afternoon, with certainty, the Sustainable Development Goals and AMR are interdependent and both rely on a broad range of actors beyond health. The emergence and spread of AMR undermines many of the SDGs that go beyond health, including poverty, gender, equality, hunger, and economic growth. In turn, achieving SDG targets will improve opportunities to combat AMR. The GA high-level meeting on AMR offers a unique opportunity to galvanize political and multisectoral support for combating the emergence and spread of AMR. Mobilizing individual communities and national action is essential to ensuring the long-term efficacy of existing and future therapeutics. Ensuring, as we've heard today, diverse UN representation at the meeting and reinforcing this whole of government and whole of society approach with diverse stakeholders is absolutely essential for a successful high-level event. Every woman, every child's active involvement in this meeting today exemplifies the diverse stakeholder ownership that is needed for immediate and long-term success. Since September 2014, the United States government has issued a comprehensive set of federal actions to combat the rise of antibiotic-resistant bacteria and to protect public health. So the United States remains a committed global partner in combating the emergence and spread of antibiotic resistance. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Amadeo. If I could, I'll take one more from this. What I'll do is we're alternating actually, and because of the interest of time, we'll only do one round. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to alternate the remaining actually ones that have been lined up, as well as, of course, the ones from the mic. And then I'll ask every one of the panelists to address both the questions that actually have been posed, such as Laurie Garrett's, and then also to make a final minute of reflection, okay? So just to know you're coming next. Yes, from the microphone.
Thank you very much. Bruce Altavogt from Pfizer. I'd like to commend Lord ONeill, the staff, the AMR Review, for a terrific job in making sure that these issues, significant public health issues, are being highlighted, and a great job with the report. Pfizer supports the importance of surveillance, of stewardship, of access to vaccines that have been highlighted in the report. We also support the importance of R&D incentives. Many of these issues, including the surveillance of stewardship, have been highlighted in the Davos Declaration that was released earlier this year and has now been signed by over 100 companies and 11 trade associations. And we look forward to an opportunity to continue to partner with you, Lord ONeill, and the others in moving this forward. My question is, given the opportunity by the G20, by the UN meeting, it's moving away from an independent panel that was chaired by yourself and into a governmental operation. And where are the venues for companies like Pfizer, for industry, to engage and be part of the dialogue so that we can continue to be partners and stakeholders moving these efforts forward? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to invite now an intervention from Ms. Jean Halloran, Director of Food Safety at Consumer Reports.
Thank you. Consumer Reports, for people in the United States at least, is pretty familiar. We have 8 million subscribers and do a lot of car testing. But we also have concerns about health and about food safety, about all the things that you might buy in the marketplace. And we have been deeply concerned about
this issue of growing antimicrobial resistance and have had deep frustration over the lack of inaction. It isn't that the problem hasn't been recognized for some time, but there hasn't been action on it. And so in the last few years, we launched some efforts on our own to at least start to get baseline data. We worked to pass laws in 20 states so that hospitals had to report their infection rates. Just something really, really basic. All hospitals should be required to report their infection rates. We also really need data on animal use. What has happened in the Netherlands is very instructive, as well as Denmark. You have to get to the facility level, to the plant level, to the farm level, and tackle the question and set limits. So we're really encouraged by what we've heard today and by this report, and we're really very encouraged by the mobilization that we hope will happen globally in September.
Thank you so much, Ms. Halloran. And one question from the standing microphone.
Thank you very much. My name is Lyndall Rowlands. I'm a journalist with IPS Interpress Service. My question relates to the agricultural sector and the upcoming high-level meeting, General Assembly meeting. What is holding back government regulation of antibiotic use in the agricultural sector? How will the high-level meeting address this? And is there a role for richer developed countries to be assisting developing countries in that area? Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for the question. And a final intervention from Dr. Otto Kars, the founder of REACT, Action on Antibiotic Resistance.
Thank you very much. I try to be very brief. Something has already been said. Having worked with this issue for almost 20 years, I'm quite astonished by the momentum that we have now, not at least 2 years. And congratulations to the AMR review that has really put this up high up in the agenda. Now, we have to realize that we're talking about the post-antibiotic era to come. But some countries hasn't even entered the antibiotic era. That has been said before, not least by Stefan Pettersson recently. And we have to increase access, and we have to use the technologies that already is there, like vaccines and existing antibiotics. So the world needs to deal with this from a global development perspective and support the developing countries with this issue. Secondly, antibiotic resistance cannot be eradicated. It cannot merely be managed. We just have to live with it. So far, we have avoided to seriously address the system changes that are needed both in healthcare and in the livestock production. Instead, we covered up for these management problems by relying on the pharmaceutical industry to produce new antibiotics when the old ones doesn't work. But that has not been a sustainable system. We all know that. The current business model has failed, and there are no drugs in the pipeline. The reasons for this are not merely financial. In fact, they are primarily scientific. And that, I think, is really important because it's said that to develop a new antibiotic for a gram-negative bacteria which had entered the bacteria, not be spit out by efflux mechanism, not destroyed, is a nightmare for medical chemists. And the commission paper before the G7 meeting in Germany told us that it might be as few as 250 researchers that really knows, are already experts in antibiotic drug development. So having said that, I think that we need to find ways for global collaboration between academicians and university researchers. I think that is the real bottleneck. They need to collaborate openly and not duplicate mistakes, and do it in collaboration with the pharmaceutical industry. But coming back to the AMR review, I think there might be a sort of imbalance a little bit in where the incentives were placed. I think the Global Innovation Fund is really, really critical, and it's much less money proposed in that sector on the upstream problems than the large rewards on the downstream. So I think we need to think on that and how universities and researchers across countries can collaborate in a much speedier way. And yes, stop, they said. Okay, fine. But technology is not the solution, only solution. We have to have social innovations. And I don't think that an awareness campaign is doing the trick. We need to go much deeper into cultural beliefs and social innovations and social behavior and social norms. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carr. Such an important reflection to end this set of interventions, a very rich set of actually reflections.